Hello, everybody. How was the lunch? I hope everything was good. Now I have a challenge for you. You ate, you had a long break, and now I'll try to put you to sleep. And then you win if by the end of it, that's not going to happen. So today I'm trying to touch on how we should adapt our pipeline, as that's our backbone in terms of development, to the challenges that are coming with LLMs, rather than if we use it, incorporate it in our application, or if you just use it as code generators. I'm Olimpi Pop. I'm currently working for a small company as its CTO. We are working in the IoT sector. Mainly, we are just taking on one side information about the environment, and then we transform it into something related to business on the other side. And we do use also LLMs, and we're trying to make the most of it, even though we have quite small things. And the whole things that we do in terms of date use something that is an epoch. Rather, even if we are just looking at the date system that we use in Christianity or another one, but also in our programming languages. For instance, Java starts counting from 1970, 1st of January. And I'm wondering whether 13th of November 2022, when ChatGPT came to light publicly, is not to be considered the new kickoff of the new era of using LLMs in everything. It wasn't new. It's already available for a couple of years now. Google published a paper, I think 8 or 9 years ago. It wasn't new, but like most other stuff, it was before of its time. And these guys had the courage or the craziness to just put it out. And starting from that point, they are challenging us, saying that creativity is not only for humans anymore, and everybody can have an assistant in their pocket, in their home. Yes, better than Alexa, better than Siri. And that was the first point. Others followed. Google Gemini, Google Bard, Cloud, and others. There are tons of them out there, and if you're just curious to see how many, even in the open source space, models are available, just look at Hugging Face. I gave this presentation, a similar presentation in June, and at that point there were 700,000 models available on Hugging Face. Yesterday in the morning, it was like 1.1 million still available. But in the end, what's the new thing with generative AI? What's generative AI? And we can go to academia. Let's take a more thorough dictionary-like definition. And mostly, it does what it says. It generates content. Usually, AI does the other way around, looks at huge amounts of data, crunches them, extracts information patterns, and so on and so forth, while generative AI takes the information and then generates new one based on what it was trained on. But what's the big fuss about it? We already have AI in our pockets, right? We have shopping cart suggestions, we have spam filters, many things that are making our lives, our modern lives, easier. Well, we can just challenge that, but that's not the purpose. What's new with this? For me, what was the main feeling that I had when starting using LLMs is the fact that we can have enhanced user interfaces. We don't have to click, you don't have to scroll, you don't have to go through the things and don't have to understand the new system, but you can ask for it. You can have an interaction with your system and just ask plainly, I want that data and I want that data, put it together and transform it. And that was the main thing that's in terms of input, that for me it was eye-opening and it just created a new paradigm in terms of how we interact with computers. And on the other hand, it's about dynamic output generation. Just think about it. Rather than just scrolling through Netflix or whatever, just browsing through a book, you can just ask plainly, what would you like to read? What would you like to watch? And any other stuff, and things can go forward. And given the quality of the movies that we still have, probably it will be the next phase where we just have things that are better and even more suitable for our needs. And that created a new idea in the company space. We have to imagine that this thing was coming after the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and everybody was trying to recover. Most of the companies were trying to recover after the kicks they had in their budgets. And there was an idea that we need to take the AI train. Everybody was crazy. I don't know how it happened for you guys. I don't know how it felt in your companies, but for me, it was the first time when I didn't have to go to my boss, ask for money, beg, make tons of business cases, beg again, and then just go over and over iteratively to get the money for doing innovation. This time, everybody was crazy. We want AI. They changed the motto of the company. They did everything. They just wanted to have it. And actually, they did. A lot of the companies that tried to take the first train of AI, they had some kind of difficulties of integrating it properly. And that was felt in the way how it reached the market. For instance, one of the interesting ones for me was Amazon. In the end, they have a huge infrastructure. They have pretty much everything. And some security researchers managed to generate a reverse shell script that can hack a couple of interesting services just using a plain mobile application of Amazon. It asked it nicely, and it generated the Python script that would allow you to hack left and right. Okay? I don't think that was in the condition of done for that, but hey, it is what it is. Another interesting one was a company from UK, a parcel company that was delivering goods, and their chatbot became a proper football hooligan. He started cursing on his customers in a continuous fashion. Well, again, that wasn't exactly maybe the football team that it was cheering for lost, but hey, it is what it is. But probably the worst thing that happened is Air Canada, that had the chatbot which lied to its customers. And obviously the customers filed for complaint as they lost the flight, they lost money, and so on and so forth. And Air Canada had a great idea. They just mentioned that it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of the chatbot, and it's sentient, it has its own ideas, so they have to charge the bot. Well, it didn't work, and Air Canada got quite a fine. And if you're wondering why it doesn't work on your LLMs, well, there are multiple things of doing it. For instance, people are trying to use ASCII art in order to go around the safety nets that usually the LLMs have, and there are multiple other ones there as well. And if you look at what I just mentioned, and my feeling, and probably, hopefully it's your feeling as well, the way how we interact with LLMs is not linear. It's not, you don't always have the same output that you had yesterday or 5 minutes ago, and usually you have to convince it to just give you what you want. You have to be very direct, and at points it's easier to do it yourself than just convince it, and that goes in a linear fashion. Also, the way how it behaves, it's different from one model to the other, and at points it's different from versions of the same model that we currently use. For instance, I implemented something that was working properly in June, and in July it was all over the board. And then we had to take steps back and try to reinforce what we initially had. And that's one of the biggest problem. It's the proof of concept chasm that we have to cross. Because when you're just trying to put something together, you just want to do it quick and usually dirty. You just connect to an API, you put the things together, you just hack it, and then hopefully it will work. But hopefully is not enough. If we think about the way how we build other stuff, the proper part of software, we want to have it modular because we want to reuse it in multiple places, and if you build it in one place, it has to go all over in all the systems because it needs to be properly maintained, like a proper library. And when it's about AI, it needs to be transparent. That's why we love also that much open source, because in case you're curious, You are able to see it, audit it, and see exactly where the problem is coming from. But most of the things that are currently available, at least at big scales, or they used to be available until not long ago, all of them are closed source. You have an interface, and you don't know exactly what's behind the scenes. And even if they just let you know, for instance, if you're using Claude, the free version, at one point they're just telling you, hey dude, I'm not giving you the access to the other model that I gave you in the morning. There are too many people online. And now you'll have another one. So how can you rely on having the same output over and over again? And also, cost is not something that we have to forget about. The cost of running LLMs is big. Even if not only in money, but also in other resources that we are just losing. So how do we get from something that is all over the place, more or less like spaghetti, to something that is more organized? And I think it was around last year when Andreessen Horowitz, the big VC company, they just put out there the LLM stack, or the emerging LLM stack, as they called it at that point. And they said, okay, this is the new wave of what it means to have a new application. In the middle, we have an orchestration. And LangChain is probably one of the most known ones. Llama Index is another one. And on the other part is the contextual data, because in the end, it's about the data that we are putting in. It's the things that are making it more closer to what you have from your company. We all have companies that have huge amounts of data. Well, I have to say this word, sorry for using it on stage, Confluence, and the other things that are not the most appropriate things where you can store data. But it's easier to interact with those rather than just scrolling, searching, and other tools that are not exactly appropriate for the current time that we are living in. And as we were discussing with some other speakers last evening, the databases have a new meaning since the LLMs came to stage. They're not just that dark part of our applications that are hidden in a corner in the basement, but now they have a different purpose, and they just provide more information from them in order to make things a lot easier. So this should be the end goal, having something more closer to what we know in terms of architecture. And I know what you think. The software development lifecycle is the one that will help us, right? It's complicated. We still didn't get to this point where we need to implement all the things that we need. But just think about it. How more complicated will it become trying to put together also AI into place? So if that was complicated, well, tomorrow, actually today, because it's already a reality, it will have more things in place. We have to understand where the AI is coming from, what data it is, how ethical it was in the way how it was put together. We need to continuously evaluate it, retrain it, and make sure that all the data that is continuously being generated is incorporated and added to the system to make sure that everything is in place. And as we are living in Europe, and we are trying to be better in terms of research, but we are very good at regulating. So the AI legislation is in place. It starts to be enforced starting from October, part of it, and it will just will come in phases. We have to have an eye also for the legislation and everything else that's needed. Besides the AI part, the Data Minimization Act, GDPR, that is already old, it's everything that needs to take in place for that as well. And one first thing that it's important to put in place is testing. That's the basic stuff, right? But in terms of AI, it's more about evaluating it to make sure that what we have and what we need is properly evaluated. And for me, it felt more, I was just thinking about frameworks and how to use it, how to properly evaluate it, and it was hard to find and put the finger on one of them. And what we ended up doing was more focusing on the outcome. to make sure that the system that we are building is actually doing what it should do. Because it's not like mathematical operations where 1 plus 1 is equal to, most often than not. But in this case, we are just focusing on the whole thing of the chain of things that we are doing, and in the end, we want to have the outcome that is desirable. So more or less, it's about when you're testing a user interface, it might be the case that for a machine, the buttons are there, but for you as a human being, it might be too stretched, it's impossible to do, and that's my feeling also when thinking about LLMs and incorporating them, because otherwise it would be hard to just put a finger on it, given that sometimes the things that you're having are different than what you had before. And what it helps is to create that interface with the rest of your system. Initially, probably in the POC phase, what my company used to do was parsing strings. After that, we just went to the other part where we just asked to have more structured data. Obviously, XML is not something that we want to know about. It's history, it's ancient history, so probably JSON is one of the formats that is easier to use, and that's a part where you just can create an interface with the rest of the system to just plug it in. But we looked at dictionary definitions, and I like to look at the elders of the industry. And one quote from Dijkstra, sorry, my Dutch is not the best these days, is saying that the question whether an AI, an LLM can think, is the same as asking whether a submarine can swim or not. But as we do it these days, it wasn't enough to just think about it and just smile or challenge it or think about it again, because it just feels like magic these days. And even if I have enough gray hair to skip from believing in magic, I still do. I just dropped it in ChatGPT because that's obviously the tool of choice these days. And I wanted to see how magic looks like. I took it, as you can see on the right-hand side, left-hand side, and I asked to generate an image. And that generated a prompt that is much better than I could have written it myself. And then here it's the outcome. And actually I put it on my living room wall. I like it. I still have to think about it, whether how good is it or not. But I wanted to see also how it goes the other way around, how it acts into digesting information. And for that, I just took a picture. I don't know if it's that familiar. I used to like it when I was a kid. It's from E.T. And I asked it to describe the picture. And obviously it just went to give me a small summary of it. But I wanted to know more about it. So I invited my fellow robot friend to describe it more. And it just described it more. It just extended on what I was doing. And in the end, I asked it to become a painter for me and create a similar picture. But it has ethics. It didn't want to give me the satisfaction of doing it. But in the end, it just made something similar. And then I realized that it's not really nice to talk about ET without asking my alien friend whether it's okay with it or not. So I decided to take a picture of myself from university and try to see how good it is to depict reality. So I asked it to to prepare myself for a mission on Mars, as now with Elon Musk rising, we'll probably all go on Mars these days. So I asked it to just transform me into a space cadet, and that was the outcome. When I asked it to move me around, I grew a helmet, and then I became shorter. And in the end, it just got my real self. After a couple of iterations, I got to my real self, and as you can see, me in flesh and bones. And when I was put on a new spaceship, I grew some beard as well. So regardless of the fact that we are building and trying to build more and more automation in our systems to just make things work as close as possible without any kind of human intervention, we are still not there yet. The human still needs to remain in the loop, especially when you're talking about AI, to ensure that we have all the proper feedback, and this needs to be in a continuous feedback loop to ensure that everything is done accordingly. Even though there are companies that are providing annotation services, most often than not, the people that are present and they are doing the annotation themselves, they are not qualified. And usually the information that they provide is weaker than what it actually does. And it's much better to have the people that really know the system, know the industry, to make sure that the outcome that you have, it will be there. And sooner, the things will just be closer to what you actually need. But it's not always about the outcome and the things that we are doing. It's about the size as well. We have to think about the fact that currently the industry is trying to be more frugal. If you look at what AWS is doing and other companies are doing in the cloud space, they are just trying to make things easier, smaller, and they are just dropping a bunch of the services that they provide. So yes, L comes from large in the LLM. And if you look at it, I just dropped there a couple of the sizes that are, rather the RAM that's needed for inference, the space that you need on your hard drives, and even the amount of power of processing that you need. And space cost is not the only dimension that we have to bear in mind. And the other dimension that is very important is the natural resources that LLMs, especially the third-party ones that are behind vendors, are consuming. And one of the most expensive one is about AI and the carbon dioxide that we are just putting in the atmosphere. For instance, if you look at it, if the amount of queries that I did for generating one picture, it's as much carbon dioxide put in the atmosphere as I would be boiling a kettle of water. And then you can just look, it's almost 100K queries will just take us on a ride with a plane from San Francisco to northern US to Seattle. But let's put it in context, it's not only about LLMs. Currently, the software industry is around 2 to 3% of the carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere, and it's close to what we have in terms of transportation, freight, plane, and trains. And because of that, it's important to make sure that we use the smallest model that we actually need. We don't need always large models. We need to iterate it. We can use transfer learning to just extract from the LLM the exact part that we actually are interested about. Not always we need to have very broad understanding. We need to niche it on what we actually need. And through that multiple iteration, we have to get to the size that actually fits the purpose that we have. For instance, I saw models that are a couple of hundreds of megabytes, tens of megabytes that are even running on the phone. And what we tried to achieve also was to have model zoos, where we just take a query, we digest it, and find the proper model that needs to help us take us to the next level, and only taking the best size for what we have. And last but not least, I think it's important to actually see whether we need it or not, because there are things that we can easily do on our PC. For instance, the other days I was playing with transforming things from uppercase into lowercase, only using tools that are on my machine, rather than just using an LLM, because that was my initial thought. And then I said, okay, let's try to do it the old school way. And that was a lot harder, but more accomplishing in the end. And we spoke earlier about the SDLC, and we are thinking about that will help us. But also, most of the work that we are doing is creative work, right? Right? That's what we are saying, that we are building the stuff, we are just generating content, we're just putting things together, and so on and so forth. Or we are just going on Stack Overflow, we are just looking through other stuff, and we're just aggregating everything together. So it goes without saying that that should be possible to be done by LLMs as well. And more, LLMs appear that are better and better into writing code. And actually, the GitHub Copilot came before the ChatGPT, came before OpenAI, and it improves on a daily basis. Last evening, somebody was saying that he cannot imagine writing code without using Copilot anymore. How about you guys? Are you using it? Do you like it? Okay, so then even though it's not, the weather is not appropriate, so by the end of the day probably we'll all be sitting on a beach. The bots will be writing the code for us, and we have to enjoy only the beach. Yes, it's right. It's not exactly the moment still, because if you look at it, in the 8 years since we can count for software development industry history, the number of developers only grew, even though the tools that we had became better and better. We didn't stop coding when we had ideas. We didn't stop coding when we had libraries, frameworks, and so on and so forth. There was more and more work. I don't know if it's to blame for the JavaScript frameworks, because they are appearing, probably 4 or 5 appeared in the meantime since we started the talk. So I don't know if that's to blame, but obviously we still have some things to do. And one thing that, even though it's surprising, I found it necessary, is you need to test the code that you write to create the safety net there. And yes, we can generate it. I did do it multiple times myself. I just take it, I generate the code, and I'm doing pair programming with the LLM. But we have to bear in mind always that we should either generate the code or the test, not always the same one, because otherwise we just have the same bias. So if there is a problem, it will just go all the way. And what we have to bear in mind is what's actually in there. The GitHub Copilot obviously used everything that is online in their repositories, so most of the open source things that are available. And given the changes of licensing that Microsoft put together since it acquired GitHub, more and more libraries are appearing each day on GitHub, and that means that we have to bear in mind that it is licensing, whether we are using somebody else's code without having permission, but also that we have to make sure that we are responsible for what we are doing. In the end, we are the ones committing, we are the ones that are taking the decision to put the code in. And if that's not enough, looking at the way how the software supply chain evolved in the last couple of years, most of the libraries are unmaintained. This is data from 2023. I didn't have a chance to look at the new reports this year, but almost 20% of the libraries that were maintained in the previous year, they were not maintained anymore. So you have those dependencies, and even if you don't know about it, it might be the case that one of your dependencies is using a dependency that is not maintained anymore, and those can become quite problematic. And one of the points, the last point, is fix your SDLC. Make sure that you have a proper pipeline that ensures the quality. You have quality gateways for everything that you have in place. Make sure that everything that you need is there. Not only the business-wise quality of the product that you put together, but also in terms of security, dependencies. Check that you have all the things that are needed there. Make sure that use tooling. For instance, the OpenSSF scorecards are a very good tooling that allows you to understand where you are in terms of that, and based on those you can just go and find corrective measures for it. And if that's not enough, I took a glimpse in the new report from this year. in terms of malicious packages that was discovered. And this is the curve. It's provided by Sonatype in their yearly report. Why Sonatype? I'm coming from the Java world, and they have Maven Central, and that's the biggest one they have. And if you look at it, last year it was around 250,000, and that was a lot. It was 2.5x more than the previous years, and actually I think it was almost double than the all previous years collided. And now it's almost 3 times that. And they will continue appearing. And if you think that's enough, I dare to challenge you on that as well, because now the things got a little bit more complicated. If you look at the AI and all the things that are happening, the attack surface is a lot different. And it's not only about the software that we develop. We are using the LLMs for things that we do for home, for our holidays. For instance, I like to use it a lot when I'm investigating things to do on holidays, because it has a lot of nice abilities. So that's one of the things that I'm doing. But on the same point, this being our assistant will have access to all the information that we know about us, about our loved ones, about our cards, location, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting is that besides the fact that we can use all the approaches that normally use for software system, because in the end, under the hood is a software system that can be hacked, we can use also other mechanisms through which we convince people. Because in the end, it interacts like a person, and there are multiple things online that provide this kind of information. How you can convince the LLM to give you access to the things that you normally wouldn't be able to access. And there are multiple points where these things can fail. And more than that, there are things that we currently cannot identify if something is wrong or not, because we actually use LLMs in points where we are not certain about things. And we ask them to provide us information about things that we normally don't know. And then it's hard to challenge those things. It's hard to know whether it's a mistake or not. And that's also the problem when there is a poison seed under the hood of the LLM, because it's almost impossible to see whether it's a problem or not. And why is it that important? Somebody said almost a decade and a half ago that software is eating the world, and he was right. And if you look at the way how the things evolved in the meantime, since the software started being all over the place, based on the GDP, the cybercrime now would be the 3rd largest economy in the world, surpassing Germany and Japan, just under China and the US. It grew quite a lot. Last year it was around 8 trillion. So you do the math, almost 20% in 1 year, and the curve is getting only steeper. It goes faster and faster in terms of getting closer to to the top, so to undertake also the United States. But last year, the same guy said that he's very confident that the AI will save the world. Well, I don't know about you, but at this point I'm a little bit skeptical about it. Like in many other countries, Romania had elections, where I'm coming from, had elections on Sunday, and the guy that came out on the first place, he used TikTok and all the AI algorithms in his favor, and now it's just pushing us on a place that we don't want to be. So we should tread carefully in the way how we use it, both on the personal level and on a professional level, in order to make sure that it will actually help us save the world rather than just putting it in a dark place. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to hear them. Thank you.